Market reaction after hours, I've never seen anything like it. This, I think fair to say, is worse than the worst case scenario.
Happy Liberation Day, everyone! Don't you feel so liberated? We're going to do a deep dive on Trump's new tariff plans that he announced as part of his Liberation Day agenda on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where we take on the craziest ideas from across our politics, our media, and the internet, all from an independent perspective. Up first, guys, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about Trump's huge, honestly earth-shattering announcements when it comes to new tariffs. He dubbed it Liberation Day, and with his remarks accompanying the rollout of new tariffs for basically every country or almost every country the U.S. trades with, he gave a really remarkable speech, and we're going to react to some clips from that. First, here's the opening of Trump's remarks, where he introduces this all as Liberation Day.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. Waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. We're going to make it wealthy, good and wealthy.
Liberation Day? Sorry, but there's just something like a little bit North Korea-y about that. Why couldn't it just be Tariff Day or something that didn't feel so propaganda-y? And what are we being liberated from exactly? Cheap groceries, affordable products from Canada, from Mexico, from the European Union, liberated from our savings and our 401ks? Because so many things come to mind when I hear this clip. But if the tariffs are going to make America wealthy again, why is the stock market absolutely plummeting in response to them?
Market reaction after hours, I've never seen anything like it. This, I think fair to say, is worse than the worst case scenario of the tariffs that many in the market expected the president to impose. You laid out a number of the percentages there.
Remember, guys, the stock market tracks pretty closely with what major corporations, what they expect their future profits to be. So they don't seem to think that tons of wealth is in our future after these huge shifts. Now, Trump and other tariff supporters argue that this will help U.S. manufacturers and bring back American manufacturing, but even that isn't at all guaranteed. One of the trade associations representing American manufacturers actually put out a statement warning that they're very concerned about these tariffs because even companies that manufacture and build and create stuff here in the US rely on inputs and parts from all around the world that are about to get a heck of a lot more expensive. The National Association of Manufacturers said in a statement, the high costs of new tariffs threaten investment, jobs, supply chains, and in turn, America's ability to outcompete other nations and lead as the preeminent manufacturing superpower. But we're going to make America wealthy again, guys. I just have to also point out that basically every credentialed economist, whether they're left, right, center, with like two exceptions, and they basically both work for Trump, opposes this, which economists disagree on stuff all the time and love to argue and fight. So when you have this degree of kind of agreement, that is remarkable. Renowned economist Tyler Cohen wrote for the Free Press, "We will be moving into a future with higher prices, less product choice, and much weaker foreign alliances. The tanking of the stock market and other possible asset price repercussions may tip America into recession and increase joblessness. This is perhaps the worst economic own goal I have seen in my lifetime. I cannot think of any credentialed economist colleague, Democrat, Republican, or independent, who would endorse it. And I haven't even mentioned the risk that some foreign nations will retaliate against American exporters, damaging our economy all the more." Now, I hope that I and basically every economist in America, I hope we're wrong about this and that it works out well for American consumers and families. I would much rather be wrong about it than be right. But regardless, even if you agree with tariffs or if you agree with the idea of what Trump's trying to do, there are a couple specific things about his approach that I actually think you shouldn't support and should concern you. And I'm going to explain those because they're so significant that even Republican senators like Rand Paul are speaking out about them. I'm going to explain and get into some detail on that after this. When it comes to the debate over LGBT issues, Americans increasingly live in different realities, and our media does too. Take this recent story we talked about on the show, where a congressperson named Sarah McBride, who identifies as a transgender woman, was referred to as congressman by one of their colleagues. If you only read partisan media, whether it's on the left or on the right, you would really struggle to find out what actually happened here. But using Ground News, an amazing service that I've personally used for years and that helps me prepare this show, you can see what both sides are saying and make up your own mind. It also tells you everything you need to know about a source's bias, factuality, and ownership. Back to this particular story, well, on the left, look at CNN's headline. Out of order, hearing abruptly ends after GOP lawmaker misgenders Congresswoman. Meanwhile, over on the right, The Blaze covered the story like this. Democrat melts down after cross-dressing comrade called Mr. during House hearing. That's quite the difference. And on Ground News, you can see over 150 different headlines all describing this same story, which is a great example of why Ground News is a better way to consume the news because everything you need to know is all in one place. What's more, using Ground News, you can get a neutral summary of the story, see how both sides are framing it, see who's covering it and who isn't, and most importantly, use your critical thinking skills to make up your own mind. I already knew media bias was bad, but using Ground News has really helped me see through it and bring you a fair and balanced show. You can get the same plan that I use, which is the Vantage subscription, if you sign up through the link on screen, ground.news/Brad, or use the QR code to get 40% off unlimited access, which comes out to just about $5 a month. This exclusive discount is available through this link, so act now to break your media bubble and keep your critical thinking skills sharp. Now, back to today's show. Okay, guys, so there's another angle here. There's actually a huge constitutional problem with Trump's new tariffs. According to the Wall Street Journal, Trump's own staff claims that all his tariffs will raise $6 trillion over a decade. Whether you support it or not, that's a huge tax increase. One of the biggest tax increases in American history, probably, if those numbers are accurate. All imposed by a president unilaterally, by himself, via executive action, without any approval from Congress. That is not how it's supposed to work, as Republican Senator Rand Paul, who supports Trump, explained in an important Senate speech. Take a listen to a clip from that.
No taxation without representation. This was the rallying cry. No taxation without representation. Our founding fathers believed so strongly in this, they embodied it in our Constitution. Our Constitution doesn't allow any one man or woman to raise taxes. It must be the body of Congress. And yet today we are here before the Senate because one person in our country wishes to raise taxes. One person can make a mistake. And guess what? Tariffs are a terrible mistake. They don't work. They will lead to higher prices. They are a tax, and they have historically been bad for our economy.
I agree with Rand Paul on this. If you support these tariffs, if you really want to do this, do it the right way. Go through the proper constitutional approach. Congress is supposed to have the power to levy new taxes on Americans, our elected representatives, not the president. Now, how is Trump working around this? Well, he's doing this by declaring a national emergency to exploit powers that Congress has foolishly, in my view, delegated to the president to impose tariffs by himself in the context of a national emergency. But those powers certainly weren't meant for this kind of thing or this broad-based effort, and the national emergency that Trump is citing is complete BS. The White House's own website says that they are declaring an emergency because of foreign trade and economic practices that have created a national emergency via large and persistent annual U.S. goods trade deficits. Trade deficits simply refers to the gap between how much we buy from another country and how much we sell to them. It's also a goods surplus. So, for example, we import more goods from Canada than we do most years, then we sell back to them, so we end up with more goods and they end up with more money. That's what our trade deficit with Canada means, and the US trade deficit refers to add up all the trade deficits we have with every country or trade surpluses. What does it come out to? And it is, in most cases for the US in recent history, a deficit of hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, most economists don't think that's a bad thing. We get more goods and services we value, and we pay people for them. That's all that number represents. But Trump views it as an emergency and spoke about it in some pretty alarming terms in his speech. Take a listen to this second clip.
For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. American steel workers, auto workers, farmers, and skilled craftsmen. We have a lot of them here with us today. They really suffered gravely. They watched in anguish as foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream. Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore. It's not going to happen.
Some countries do have unfair and illegal trade practices that they engage with us. China is a great example of that. But just across the board, I don't think that other countries selling Americans goods they want is raping us. I do not think that when we import lumber from Canada and then use it to build homes here in the US, we are being raped. I don't think that when trucks bring bell peppers in from Mexico to be sold in US grocery stores and I buy some and make fajitas at home that night, I don't think I'm being raped. Trump views any deficit in trade as us being ripped off, but I just think that's wrong. And I think it's a false premise that underlies his entire worldview when it comes to trade. But even if you disagree with me, even if you do think that the trade deficit is a serious problem, it's not a national emergency in the way Trump is trying to declare it to be. If you look at the graph of the US trade deficit over recent decades, both as raw dollar terms adjusted for inflation, but also as a percentage of the size of the economy, we've had significant trade deficits of hundreds of billions of dollars. It's not a new thing. So I don't see how you can claim that it's an imminent national emergency, like a hurricane just struck, or like a pandemic just started that's raging across the country. A long-term economic factor you would like to change is not a national emergency. And it's certainly not what Congress envisioned when it authorized the president to take emergency powers in real emergencies. By this logic, get ready for future Democratic presidents to declare a climate emergency or a student debt emergency or whatever they feel like to just do what they want to do by exploiting emergency powers. That was already done during the COVID pandemic, especially by Democratic elected officials, and now Trump's doing it too. We can expect that trend to get worse unless Congress actually steps up and rescinds some of those emergency authorizations, which I think they should. Now, one piece of pushback I get when I discuss this topic, and one thing Trump keeps saying, is that they're doing reciprocal tariffs.
In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple. Can't get any simpler than that.
The idea here is that, well, we're just going to charge other countries what they charge us with in tariffs and trade barriers. Now, I've never been particularly compelled by this because I think tariffs are harmful to your own citizens. So just because other countries are engaged in self-destructive economic policies, that doesn't mean I think we should as well. But maybe it would be a good idea if it actually led to an end result where both sides lowered their trade barriers and their tariffs. But I've always thought it's more likely to just lead to a tit-for-tat escalation where we end up with bigger barriers in the end. But the bigger problem is that they say they're doing reciprocity, but they're not. Let me explain. The White House put out this massive chart that they've had circulated all over the media and the internet where they list the supposed rates that other countries are charging us and then state the rate that we will be charging them back in the name of reciprocity. But this sheet is just totally wrong. Whatever formula they use to come up with these numbers isn't remotely accurate. As the economist Ryan Bourne pointed out on Twitter, High tariff Brazil faces the same reciprocal tariff as near unilateral free trade Singapore of 10%. Israel, an ally that dropped its tariffs on the US, sees a higher US tariff, 17%, than our adversary of Iran. How does any of that make sense? It was also pointed out on Twitter that other numbers here aren't accurate. For example, the fact sheet claims that South Korea is charging us a 50% tariff, but we have a trade agreement with them and it's actually much lower. In the same way, the EU is not charging the US a 39% tariff, but that's what it claims on the fact sheet they put out. In fact, the federal government and the Trump administration's own publicly available data contradict the numbers they put on this Liberation Day propaganda chart. As journalist Tiana Low-Dosher pointed out on Twitter, Cambodia does not tariff American goods at 97%, and Brunei does not tariff at 47%, like the Trump fact sheet claims. She writes, "How do I know the Trump administration's Liberation Day roster is filled with completely made-up numbers? Because the Trump administration's top 2 trade websites directly contradict them." She cited trade.gov and ustraderepresentative.gov to point out the numbers that directly contradict what the White House's fact sheet stated. Now, the Trump administration could claim that their numbers are so much higher because they're also coming into account, they're trying to include non-tariff barriers to trade. But still, it's all wrong. Tiana pointed out, the World Bank and the United Nations have spent decades creating new econometric methods to quantify non-tariff barriers. One OECD method shows that Japan, which already has one of the lowest tariffs on us, also has some of the fewest non-tariff barriers, while Russia has the most. But Trump said Japan tariffs us 46% while neglecting to even add Russia to his list. So the whole thing, the whole formula and stat sheet that they're using to set the agenda and what they're going to charge other countries in reciprocal tariffs, the whole thing is wrong. The whole thing is just inaccurate. And you're setting tariff rates for other countries based on incorrect numbers and data. That's, even if you support this agenda, totally unacceptable, totally embarrassing and amateur hour. Just a few more thoughts, and shout out to y'all who've made it through this episode. I know it's probably a little wonky and a little dense, less entertaining than our normal stuff, but this is really important. It's going to impact all of us, basically anyone who buys anything, because our economy is so intertwined with the rest of the world. These tariffs are going to result in huge economic losses for average American families. I've already seen estimates about thousands of dollars of what they will cost in terms of the spending for average American families. And I just think it's a huge unforced error for the Trump administration. I mean, President Trump, prior to the COVID pandemic, which threw a wrench in everything for understandable reasons, had a very strong economic record in his first term. There were record low unemployment levels, inflation was low, and he did that through, yes, he had some tariffs on China and a few targeted tariffs on specific things, but he didn't do an all-out trade war. He did that through typical tax cuts, deregulation, traditional conservative economic policy, which simply does not include this kind of worldwide trade war and protectionism. Why not just do the same thing again that worked last time? Why try this radical, different approach? It's not about, by the way, weaning off China and reducing our dependence on China, who is an adversary, because that's a goal I support. But if you really wanted to do that, you wouldn't be hitting other countries like Vietnam and South Korea that we could be trading more with instead of China to reduce our dependence on China. You wouldn't be hitting them with massive new tariffs. And this is actually in some ways a boon to China, who's already started connecting with some of these countries like Japan about trading more. And if you know anything about the history of China and Japan, which I don't know much, but I know a little, the fact that they're cooperating and getting along tells you something about how remarkable the moment we're living in is and just how alienating this is to our allies like Japan. People specifically voted for Donald Trump because of the economy, because of the cost of living, because prices were so outrageously high and people struggled so much to get by under Biden. And people wanted a return to Trump's first term economic policies. People do not want everything they need and buy to get more expensive. They don't want a shrinking economy. They don't want a crashing stock market or a potential recession. And this could go down as one of the biggest own goals in modern political history, that unfortunately, will end up hurting a lot of working class people who voted for Trump the most, because they are the ones who spend the most proportion of their income and who have the least wiggle room in their budgets to deal with the cost of living going up. It might protect some jobs in certain industries, but it will destroy far more in other industries where the cost of doing business goes up exponentially. I think the whole thing is a massive, massive mistake. But like I said at the beginning, I hope for our country's sake that I'm wrong. But what do you guys think? Do you disagree with me? You think I'm totally wrong? I want to hear you out. I always do read the comments, and I love hearing what you guys have to say, so do comment with your thoughts down below, and please do consider hitting that like button and maybe even subscribing if you haven't yet. Thanks again to Ground News for sponsoring today's episode, and we'll talk again tomorrow.